Hi, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Impact, where ImpactAlpha editors discuss some of the most interesting impact investing and sustainable finance stories of the week. I'm Brian Walsh. It's Thursday, August 22nd. Today, I'm joined by ImpactAlpha's editorial director, Amy Cortese. We'll discuss how pension funds in pro-ESG blue states are outperforming those in anti-ESG red states, what impact investors and entrepreneurs are saying about the opportunities ahead in a potential Harris administration, who accepts the Democratic nomination for president tonight in Chicago, and how coal-dependent India is offering generous subsidies to boost adoption of rooftop solar to power homes. That's all coming up on This Week in Impact. Welcome, Amy. Welcome back to the podcast. How are you doing?
Great, Brian. Good to be back. And it's a beautiful day here in Brooklyn.
I'm glad you're experiencing that. It's almost fall weather here towards the end of August.
Yeah, but I'm enjoying it.
Yes, but the heat is still on for ESG. So first up, it appears being anti-ESG may cost state pensions billions of dollars in cumulative returns. Our colleague Lindley Browning had exclusive access this week to a new report by California-based impact advisory firm HIP Investor, which found that public pension funds in Democratic-led states outperform those in Republican-led states. Amy, walk us through some of the findings of this study.
Sure, Brian. It was kind of a fun study and another data point in the broader ESG wars we've been covering. So what HIP found over a period of more than a decade was that pension funds in Democratic-led states averaged returns of 9.1% a year compared to 8.8% for pension funds in red states over that same period. And the numbers were even more stark when you look at states with anti-ESG laws. And there are 20 states that have anti-ESG laws on their books. But pension funds in those states averaged 8.5% returns, which lagged the pro-ESG states, because there are states with pro-ESG laws on the books. They returned 9% on average. So that was the starkest difference of all.
Yeah, and when you say 8.5%, 9%, that sounds, rounding up. But when you're talking about the huge volume of billions and billions of dollars invested, that 0.5% really does add up. And the cumulative effect is very large, especially as you look over that compounded effect and impact over many years.
Yeah, exactly. HIP added it up and it came to $159 billion lost by some of these anti-ESG state pensions or pensions in anti-ESG states over the 12 years. And, it's important to keep in mind that these pension funds represent the savings, right, of millions of American teachers, firefighters, government employees, and a lot of public sector workers. So, this is really a financial hit that hurts everyday Americans.
Yeah, and we should also clarify, the time period for this study was about 2011 to 2022, and not all of those pro-ESG or anti-ESG policies were in place for that whole period.
That's exactly right. Yes, this has been the anti-ESG attacks and these laws are really a phenomenon of just the past few years.
So, Amy, we've been covering the Republican efforts to politicize ESG in the pages of ImpactAlpha for many years now. And what do you make of this new data? Do you think it'll help abate those attacks on ESG?
I don't know if it will help abate the attacks, but it should, right? The whole thing is ridiculous, right? Let's face it. And it's ironic, as we have pointed out many times in ImpactAlpha, that the so-called pro-business Republicans are trying to tell investors how they may invest. And I think it's very clear by now, especially to fund managers, that climate change, social inequality. A lot of these ESG issues are a material risk. And just look at, just taking climate risk for one. We've had we've had disaster after disaster over the past, few years. The extreme weather events are just really accelerating, and they're becoming stronger, and making huge swaths of the country just uninsurable. So how you could, just ignore this issue and in fact ban it is really puzzling. And I don't think any pension fund managers are really falling for that. They may have to work within the rules of their state, but I think if you ask most pension fund managers or any pension fund manager, they want the facts, they want to assess risk, and they want to make the best decisions. And that entails often considering ESG factors.
I think that's a great way to put it, that there's assessing the risk and looking at the facts and trying to make more informed decisions. And ESG is really just a way of bringing additional lens, and which means additional data and additional analysis to investment decisions. It's not necessarily just a checking the box exercise or anything of that nature. It's actually just looking at the broader systemic risk factors for your investment environment.
Right, and you look at huge pension funds like CalPERS, right, and they're doubling down on this. They've earmarked 100 billion for climate investing because they see not just the risks there, but also the opportunity. Like these are the growth sectors of the future.
Lindley also pointed in the story to a study from the Pew Charitable Trust on this issue. What did she find there?
Yeah, it was a super interesting study that found widespread agreement among various experts that environmental factors, climate, all of these, things that we're talking about pose systemic risk to the broader financial system, including the 5 trillion in assets that are invested by public pension funds. So it just shows that I think this, sort of silly Republican anti-ESG stance is just really fighting against the tide.
All right, well, let's take a quick break there. When we come back, we'll shift from the ESG wars to the Harris campaign's inclusive prosperity agenda, which was on display at the DNC this week. Good jobs with good wages, entrepreneurship, and the ownership economy are all themes that ImpactAlpha has been regularly covering for many years now. And those also happen to be some of the main themes of the emerging Harris-Walz campaign, as we saw this week at the DNC in Chicago. Now, Amy, you and a number of our colleagues have been covering the campaign from afar. We also have had our own Sherelle Dorsey on the ground in Chicago talking to a number of folks. What are you seeing and covering?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's been great having Sherelle in Chicago to really pick up on like the energy on the ground there. We've all been watching on TV at night, like many Americans. And so I just want to say, like, we're not a political publication, but we have been covering, as you say, this inclusive prosperity agenda that the vice president in her campaign has been laying out, but from the perspective of what it means for businesses and investors. And so many agents of impact have been working for years to achieve that kind of inclusive prosperity. So it was interesting that even before the DNC kicked off, Kamala Harris previewed her opportunity economy, as she calls it, at a campaign stop in Pennsylvania on Sunday. And so when she was asked there how she would pay for policies, including her proposal for a $6,000 child tax credit for the first year of a child's life, she really spoke about it in the language of business and returns on investment. which was kind of refreshing. So, for example, a more modest child tax credit that was in place during the Biden-Harris administration effectively cut child poverty rates by half. And it's the same for her housing proposals. She's proposed incentives to encourage developers to build 3 million affordable homes, which is the housing gap that we face, in her first term. And she also proposed offering $25,000 in down payment assistance for first time home buyers. So, of course, these are proposals that come with a price tag. But she made the point that investments in home ownership would create a stronger tax base for communities and, uh, you know, enable them to fund priorities like schools and education. And here's what she said.
Sure. Well, I mean, you just look at it in terms of what we are talking about, for example, around children and the child tax credit and extending the EITC. It's at $6,000 for the first year of a child's life. The return on that investment in terms of what that will do and what it will pay for will be tremendous. We've seen it when we did it in the first year of our administration. We reduced child poverty by over 50%. So that's a lot of the work. And then what we're doing in terms of the tax credits, we know that there's a great return on that investment. When we increase home ownership in America, what that means in terms of increasing the tax base, not to mention property tax base, what that does to fund schools, again, return on investment. I think it's a mistake for any person who talks about public policy to not critically evaluate how you measure the return on investment. When you are strengthening neighborhoods, strengthening communities, and in particular the economy of those communities, and investing in a broad-based economy, everybody benefits, and it pays for itself in that way.
So in a way there, it sounds like Vice President Harris is talking about impact measurement and management.
Yeah, you could look at it that way.
Now, on Wednesday night, Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota and Harris's running mate, laid out in his first big address to the country in very vague terms, I must say, about Harris's economic agenda. And he mentioned some things about cutting middle-class taxes and looking at prescription drug prices and looking at, as you mentioned, making home ownership more affordable. But he did not mention, and nor did I hear any of the primetime speakers at the DNC mentioned climate change and anything related to the Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act, which we, of course, have covered at length here on ImpactAlpha. What do you make, Amy, of climate not being a bigger topic at the DNC this week?
Yeah, it's a very big change from the Biden-Harris administration, which talked a lot about climate change. And I don't think that it signals any retreat. I think it's more a political calculation, right? Like she's got to win over swing states like Pennsylvania, where fracking generates a lot of revenue for the state and employment. So I think she's just walking a fine line here, but what you do see her talking about are kind of the economics of that policy and some of the kitchen table issues. So, like the Inflation Reduction Act, it is easily the most consequential legislation we've seen in a long time for climate and ever, I would say. And Vice President Harris cast the tie-breaking vote for that in 2022. But what she's been emphasizing is not its ability to cut greenhouse gas emissions, but the good green jobs it's creating. I think it's estimated it could create 9 million jobs over the next decade, and the EV and battery and chip plants that are going up in mostly red states, it should be noted. And so in its just 2 years, the IRA has attracted 500 billion in private investment for some of these clean manufacturing plants. So that message is where we're finding crossover appeal. And a sign of that is a letter that was sent just a couple of weeks ago by 18 Republican House representatives who were urging House Speaker Mike Johnson not to repeal the IRA's tax credits, right? Because they are what is financing all of these, clean power and EV and manufacturing plants in their districts. So the IRA is turning out to be, to have this like economic popularity. So I think we're seeing her kind of double down on that message.
Right, and just the IRA itself, the Inflation Reduction Act, as you mentioned, is perhaps the greatest piece of climate change fighting legislation in world history, and yet it's called the Inflation Reduction Act. So it's selling a climate policy through an economic lens and what it does for kitchen table issues.
Well, Brian, and to your point, I think it will eventually live up to its name, Inflation Reduction Act. It's expected to save Americans up to 38 billion on electricity costs by 2030 with the, increase of solar, low cost solar and wind energy into the grid. And millions of Americans have taken advantage of some of the tax credits available to them to do energy retrofits and purchase electric vehicles and induction stoves and heat pumps. So it is hitting the kitchen table issues. And then the overlooked part always is the healthcare aspects of it. Part of the IRA was tackling the price of prescription drugs, which have been skyrocketing. And just recently, the Biden administration finalized an agreement with Big Pharma to cap the prices of like 10, popular prescription drugs that are used by many people in Medicare. So, I think eventually it will live up to that inflation reduction name.
All right, well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll pivot from U.S. climate policy to Indian climate policy with a new government subsidy for residential rooftop solar. Coal is the main source of India's energy, accounting for half of total installed power capacity. Solar energy only made up 19% of the installed capacity, and within that, rooftop solar on top of homes is a small fraction. But the potential is huge. Amy, Shefali Anand reported for us this week about a new government program in India which will provide $9 billion in subsidies to facilitate rooftop solar for an estimated 10 million households. Can you tell us about this new program and why it is significant?
Yeah, Brian, the Modi administration announced the Solar Home Free Electricity Program in February. In many ways, it's very reminiscent of our own Inflation Reduction Act we were just talking about. But it's really looking to subsidize rooftop solar in India, which is growing very rapidly and, as we know, is like mostly coal powered at the moment. So this program has proven to be really popular. Since it was announced in February, it's already had 1.4 million applications from households to put solar on the rooftops, and it's been called a people-led energy transition. So once again, it's kind of kitchen table issues driving this. Indian households see this as a way to lower their costs.
Now, that's 1.4 million applications since its launch, but that's not necessarily 1.4 million installations. That's probably going to take some time. But the total addressable market, if you will, is 250 million homes in India that could be suitable for rooftop solar. So there still is a long way to go here.
Yeah, and it's important to note the potential of this, right? And why it is so important. Like India is one of the biggest and fastest growing economies. And if it continues to power that growth and it's growing middle class with coal, then global climate goals for keeping warming to around 1.5 degrees Celsius, which are already, by the way, looking kind of shaky, I would say are kind of doomed. So we need India on board, and some of these like Western led efforts, like these just energy transition partnerships, are kind of getting off to a slow start. And so that is where the US and other Western countries are working with, emerging market countries to help them transition to more renewable energy. But, maybe it's something like this kind of bottom up, lowering costs for households that in the end are maybe more effective.
Now, rooftop solar is a commoditized industry in the sense that the technology doesn't require a lot of innovation. It's more of a business model challenge. So how do you get the financing right so that the homeowners can afford to install the rooftop solar over time? And these subsidies will go a long way towards helping support those kind of innovations in business models. But can you tell us a little bit about some of the impact investment fund managers and companies that are looking at this space and trying to make their mark?
Sure. Well, Brian, there are, to be clear, a lot of innovations and advancements still happening in solar. But you're right. The basic panels are pretty much commodities now. So it is an implementation challenge. And there have been a bunch of deals recently in India to help speed up the adoption of home solar that ImpactAlpha has written about. One of them is a financial company called Metafin, and they do rooftop solar loans in India. They recently raised $5 million from prime venture partners and Varanium Capital. Then in April, Leapfrog Investments and Avishkar Capital invested $48 million in another Indian company called Electronica Finance, which provides rooftop solar loans to micro and small businesses. So the kind of ecosystem is coming together to support this, and supported by investors who are investing in this.
All right. Well, this is a promising area and interesting to see how this market develops and if rooftop solar can really take off in India to put a dent in the enormous coal consumption that takes place in that country.
Let's hope so.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for This Week in Impact. Thank you so much, Amy.
Thank you, Brian. It was fun to be back.
Great to have you. And thank all of you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen and share this with a friend or colleague. You can also send us feedback. Email us at podcast@impactalpha.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to help out, be sure to rate us and give us a review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other people find the show. This Week in Impact is a production of ImpactAlpha and part of the ImpactAlpha podcast network. For more exclusive stories about the world of impact investing and sustainable finance, join other agents of impact by subscribing to ImpactAlpha. Just go to impactalpha.com/subscribe for full access. Thanks to our producer extraordinaire, Isaac Silk. For Amy Cortese, I'm Brian Walsh. We'll see you next week for more Impact.